Hello YouTube viewers, welcome to my channel Science to Technology. In today's show, Computer Wednesday, we're going to talk about AMD Ryzen 7000 launch. It was announced a few months ago, now they have launched it. So let's dive right into it. Now this whole ecosystem is Zen 4. Now Zen 4 is internal name, it has been packaged into AMD Ryzen 7000 for you and me. Now this puppy is 5 nanometer node. Now be mindful that's a normal node for mobile phone processors, but it's a big deal for desktop processors. So it's still cutting edge. And not to mention almost everything is 5 except that Zen. It's AM5 socket, it's a PCI 5 socket, 5.0, it's DDR5, everything is 5. So except that Zen 4, they should have shifted the number 1. But you get the point. And they have announced 4 CPUs with this. And flat out, the idea is that given the track record of AMD, given how AMD genuinely became good to a point where back in the days they were like, dude, you are poor, you buy AMD. Then it became, okay, AMD is a good alternate. Then it became like, if you're doing threaded operations, AMD is better. If you're doing productivity, AMD is better. Then literally by 5000, it actually became, no, you want good stuff, you buy AMD. So that was mind-boggling. So at this point in time, we have enough market data to know that if AMD's Ryzen gamble actually paid off, the idea of chiplets actually paid off. So flat out they are beating 12th gen. Now again, that's not a big deal because given the fact that it's old equipment, again AMD could have just looked at it, reverse engineered, it's like, what is the performance metrics of it, let's make something better. Now question is, by how much in terms of cost? Meaning if you are AMD fan and you're like, hey, I can beat this, here's deal, by how much? If let's say this cost X and you have to spend 2X to beat it, that's not good. But if let's say cost X, that's cost X, not that important. But here's the deal, what AMD is claiming, they can beat this puppy almost by 50% in terms of price to performance ratio. Now that, if that is true, if people actually have it in their hand and they test it out, that will be damn. Now at this point in time, the track record says that most likely they have, flat out, they could beat this sort of performance by 50% the cost. So that's awesome. Now at this point in time, what about Raptor Lake? That's supposed to be the equal competitor of that. Well, most likely it has very low hope, realistically speaking, because be mindful, what AMD did is a whole paradigm shift. Basically they went from making giant monolithic dies to actually making chiplets. So benefit of that was that they had parallel workings, meaning communication between the CPU cores and the everything else was handled by IO block. So they can have a different team just dealing with the IO block, they could have a different team just dealing with the core. So that allowed them super quick iterative efficiency. And not to mention, because each chiplet was very small, they had very low wastage. So over time they refined themselves very quickly. And you can see that when Ryzen was first announced, it was like barely working. Then it was like, okay, we see you. Then it's like by 3000, actually if you are doing this, you may want to buy this. By 5000, it's like, damn good. So that paradigm shift actually is starting to pay off. So at this point in time, Intel's paradigm shift was very simple. They were like going big and little core. But again, you have to understand, big and little core is pointless unless the operating system truly is designed to utilize it, which again is something that should happen over the Windows 11 and 12 generations, so to say. But so far nothing. So at this point in time, the likelihood of that Raptor Lake being the champion is very low. And there is a very good chance that even if it has little bit more performance, AMD just have to reduce the price by a little bit and be like, done. So likelihood that Raptor Lake would be great is low at this point in time. So what about AM5? Now AM5 is one thing you have to understand. It's the next socket for a few years. Basically, they are flat out claiming by 2025. That makes 2023, 2024, 2025, 3 years. Now that may sound very little, but you have to understand, they are at least trying to give you 3 generations or even more. Most likely, that's why that has the plus. There's a very good chance they may be able to achieve 4 years of cycle support, which is very ahead of Intel, which is like, new model, new, done. It's like your old motherboard, lol. But AMD has actually committed to AM4, and that people have seen it. People have very old motherboard, they can put new processor, reduce their power consumption. If they are like, purposing old PC for something else, they have done it. So this sort of promise that we're gonna do this is something that has been built upon. That's how like you have customers' confidence. So AM5 has that good support. People are like, dude, we get it. Like if you are switching from pin grid array to pad grid array, it will take you have to throw old things away. And the explanation given was that it's fundamentally very difficult to make sure that many pins, the amount of pins they wanted to have in the next generation was too high. That could not be viable for CPU system, so they had to go to Intel route. Again, why they were doing this is very different, I don't know, but like they were doing it. So they had to switch from pin to pad. That's why fundamentally they cannot do backwards compatibility. They had to make that jump. Sooner or later they had to make that jump. And again, that's, and think of it this way, majority of their basically server processors are not that. So sooner or later it was just a headache for them, so it had to move to this. So AM5 became the thing that actually did that. Now cooler support is also very interesting, specifically if you invested a lot of money in coolers. Coolers are becoming very expensive. Back in my days, we just used to use with OEM coolers. Then it became like, bit high power coolers. Then it became like liquid coolers, which are expensive. Now imagine it this way, you have to throw your cooler away. That's expensive, that's painful. So they're like, no, AM4 cooler would be flat out supported. You do not have to do too much about it. That's amazing. That you may think that's a very little thing, but it does translate to a lot. So that's awesome, and they have good history of keeping their promises. So if they are saying we're gonna make Ryzen the next big thing, they actually did it. If they are saying that we're gonna maintain AM3 as far as possible, they did it. They maintained AM4 as far as possible, actually reworked with motherboard vendors and redo the BIOS codes. They did it. So fundamentally they have a good confidence, where people, if they're saying that we're gonna do it, people will like, yeah, most likely I'm pretty sure they will touch 2026. So motherboard will start from very low prices of $125. Now that may sound very cheap and expensive at the same time, depending on your financial status, but it is on the lower end. That's around 10,000 rupees in India, a bit more than that. So in India, by 15,000 rupees, you should be able to get a good motherboard. Now it will start PCI 4.0, which is a bit odd, that like the whole point of this generation is going to 5, but reality is PCI 5.0 is too goddamn fast. How fast? Almost at the same speed of RAM. Like that's why you will notice in server industry, no longer servers are going for ludicrously large amount of RAM, simply because memory has reached a point where they're like, dude, it's flat out fast enough. CPU is becoming the bottleneck. So PCI lane that is 5.0 is too goddamn fast. There is no graphics card that can utilize it. There is no non-server SSD that can utilize it. So realistically, it's not useful for people. So PCI 4.0 is an easy way to reduce the cost. Now they will do DDR5. Now this is one thing you have to understand. When Intel released DDR5, it almost felt like a rush system, because, and not to mention pandemic, bad timing and all that jazz, that created a paradox. Paradox was that everything was hyper expensive, and now you are creating a new system in that hyper expensive environment. Consequences, nobody was buying that. That forced Intel to redo their motherboards and be like, support DDR4. Consequence, DDR4 people started to buy, and DDR5 still remained higher in price, even though prices should have started to come down, because they gave it two options. Now recently people had interview with AMD engineers, and they were flat out, it's like, dude, DDR5 will never come down in price unless we make it into the standard. So it has to be done. Then only when the companies, basically every RAM manufacturer, looks at it, it's like, okay, AMD is releasing this big thing and there is so much demand, like this many processors they're gonna sell, then they're gonna have like, you know what, now we should pump up our DDR5 production. That will, manage supply and demand, and then you will have price stabilization. So giving two options on a new system always make sure that people always choose the cheaper one, always. Because you may be like, I'm Linus Tech Tips, I can afford whatever the hell I want, but most people are not. So that's a very good strategy. And not to mention PCI 4.0 still is unsaturated unless you are doing something ludicrous with it. So flat out, even if you buy the cheapest motherboard, you still would be stable enough, and having PCI DDR5 gives you long-term stability. So it's a very good new approach, a new era. Basically, they are moving closer to their server lineup. So one whole stack will work. So what about the CPUs? These are the 4 CPUs they have released, and I have no idea who came up with the naming conventions, but it's like 7600X, 7700X, 7900X, 7950X. They might as well just simply say Ryzen 9 16 core. But you get the point. Like, so they have the 6 core is the lowest one, then you have 8 core, then you have 12 core, and then you have 16 core. And you have to understand this. The public should get it in their hands by end of this year, basically 2022. I wrote it wrong. And price is very stable compared to the last launch. You have to understand this is a very big deal given the fact that inflation is happening. Half of the world is in war, other half is the world is on fire. So that is a mind-boggling big move. Now, I don't think it's a big move from the goodness of their heart. I think it's morely from, if we actually keep increasing the price at this point in time, nobody will buy it. Fuel prices, if they cross a certain threshold, people are like, dude, computer is not something that I need to buy. So I think from AMD's point of view, it's like a good guy move plus a wise move. So it's a really good thing that you may think these prices are very high, but you have to understand, if you look at the same slide from back in the day, you're like, dude, they are more or less same. Some are like up, some are down. So it's more or less exactly the same. They are completely stable. And that means they are losing money per unit they are selling. Losing as in like compared to the last time. Compared to, let's say they were making X, this time they will be making X by 4. Or maybe if they are very lucky, X by 2. But again, by X2, because of the fuel prices, price hike of copper, price hike of silicon, everything is becoming expensive. So having this sort of price, damn. But again, I'm reasonably sure even they know for a fact that industry will not just eat up the cost. They will not just like lol. So price is rather good. Now clocks, this is one thing that Intel actually had like a really good experience. They were really able to boost their clock frequencies. Now AMD is also making sure they can achieve 4.5 gigahertz all, like just go 4.5 gigahertz. Now be mindful, gigahertz have this weird relationship with power consumption. If you look at the server system, you will still find things are running at like 2.5 gigahertz, still running at barely 4 gigahertz. Only some things are touching that kind of 4 or 5 gigahertz. Very few things are actually touching that. Reason is exponential power consumption. So if 2 gigahertz, no power consumption. Your processor is just like idling. 3 gigahertz, lot of power consumption. 4, idiotically lot. 5, forget about your power consumption. So that's why even though back in the day somebody overclocked a bulldozer into like 8 gigahertz, the reason we don't have 8 gigahertz processor now, even though we can physically achieve it, is just the power consumption becomes stupid. So that is why having this sort of boost, power oomph is requires them to let go of their TDP. Last generation, they were more focused on efficiency. They were more focused on laptop environment, where they were like, dude, we have to make sure that Intel actually gets kicked out of laptop environment. So they were focusing on a lot of efficiency. And that was the whole spiel about AMD 5000. Efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. Here they are like, we have efficiency, we'll make a completely independent SKU for laptop ones, but this one we'll just let it go. We'll just talk to our motherboard vendors and they're like, if you're making AM5 system, make sure it has power envelope of upwards of 200 watts. Now that will allow them to flex their CPUs. These puppies can actually flex themselves, and that's why the TDPs are so high. They are like from 105 to 170 to 170. And be mindful, these are generally average under normal load scenario. But if you go really hardcore load, like video rendering for long duration, not for short duration, for long duration, then you will surpass that. So you do have to have powerful cooler, and not to mention, given the fact that they want to achieve burst of 5.7 upwards of, that's very fast. That means in that spike scenario, you have to have good motherboard, otherwise CPU will simply not go to up that high, because 5.7 may sound it's a very close to like 5.2 exponential power curve, exponential. So achieving that sort of thing requires a very oomfish motherboard, and not to mention a cooler that can withstand it. And they are giving you iGPU, and they have announced this RDNA 2 base work system. So it's not amazing, latest or greatest, but being very mindful. Why AMD is giving integrated GPU is just from usability point of view. Think of it this way. Let's say you're an office worker and you're doing something that is very CPU intensive, meaning you will benefit from getting, let's say, 7700X or something like that. You will benefit from, let's say, majority of things, but you have to buy that processor plus a graphics card, plus the higher power bill that you have to pay. What if you had something that is good enough, just good enough? Hey, can you show a desktop window? Can it just get the basic things done? Yeah, it will do that. Majority of people still have that dedicated graphics card. Yeah, for gamers it's like a big thing. Majority of people still don't want it, and that was a very huge attraction from Intel point of view. AMD did had a better product, but because it was not universal, like Intel, you buy about it, you don't think too much about it. It will always have GPU in it. When you had buy AMD, you had to talk to it. It's like, hey, is it a GPU or is it Ryzen? Ryzen did not have that. So AMD is like, making sure that vulnerability is now fixed. That means these processes over the years, basically let's say 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, they'll still be able to be used in NAS, router, things of that nature, and office systems, because of that, the fact that it has integrated GPU. So AMD is very clear about it. It's not a gaming GPU, it's not a APU, it's just there to get your job done. Ideally, both of the, even the motherboards that are coming out, they have dual display outputs. It should be able to do basic office work directly on the processor. And if you are in a scenario where you only need CPU, tada. So it's a basically making sure their package offering is far more attractive to larger amount of people. It's not for you and I to like go vroom vroom on it. So that's the aim with this. What about the ecosystem? Now, because it's a completely new ecosystem, from the motherboards, the RAM and all that jazz, it has to cost a lot. You have to be mindful. And again, the box design is actually is a bit more posh this time. It's like, you know, you're rich if you're buying that. So motherboard and RAM will cost a lot. You have to accept it. And that's why AMD said, like, AMD had a direct talk with AData, Corsair, Agile, G-Skill, and Kingston, and all many other companies. There's like 15 kits will be launched. So I'm pretty sure they have a lot of talks. And the idea was very simple. Industry almost got burnt by Intel. Intel was, because again, Intel was like, hey, we're gonna launch DDR5. Industry is like, we're gonna make DDR5. Intel is like, it's not selling much, so let me go back to DDR4. And the manufacturers were like, what the hell? Again, you have to, chicken and egg scenario happens. So AMD is like, no, DDR5 only. Only DDR5. Now be mindful, server industry was like supporting it. Like, again, server generally does not have RGB RAM. So you have to take a brunt of the cost. But again, what can we do? It has 4 motherboard chipset, which was like upgraded from last 3 times. The last time they announced there were like 3 systems. Now they have added this B650 Extreme. I have no idea who the hell come up with this name. It's like, dude, can't you say X670, X671? Done. Go home. Sweet dreams. Don't put Extreme into it. And don't put Extreme in 2 places. That makes it stupid. Like B65. Now, why the heck B650 got Extreme? Simply because people were like, hey, can you have something that is like, has the PCI 5.0 lane into more places? They're like, okay. And 670 actually did that, but problem was it was very expensive. So B650 Extreme is like a bridge solution where it's like, you know, it's not too expensive, but it does give you more PCI 5.0 lane. Now, if you need 5.0 lane, you will pay for it. If you don't need it, it's just a good future proofing. Maybe you may buy some very high grade, you know, SSD, which again, I'm expecting in the future as direct storage becomes a big thing. And there are server SSDs that can utilize PCI 5.0. It may become a useful thing, but not today. Not today. Today is useless, but I'm pretty sure in 2-3 years, it may become useful. And that's the aim of AMD here. It should allow few years of upgrade path with AM5. Oh, I wrote AM4 here. Now you also have to understand they are not abandoning AM4. From an economics point of view, they know for a fact that world is going through some bad recession, meaning nobody has money and fuel prices are going YOLO. So in those sort of scenario, having this latest and greatest, nobody's gonna buy it. Like everybody has a breaking point where they're like, dude, will not buy it. That happens to GPU. Why do you think NVIDIA literally has over a supply of 3000 series GPUs? That's the whole thing. Everybody has upper limit, meaning if you keep increasing the price, people will simply let it go. It's like, bro, I'm sorry, I can't afford this. So they know for a fact that they have made an amazing thing with AM4. It's good. It's really good from price to performance ratio, from energy consumption. It's really good. What if we continue it? We'll just polish it, release 1 or 2 more processors with it. Not too much, but 1 or 2, and keep it as a, like, you know, low tier option where it's like, dude, we get it. Not everybody has like GG amounts of money. But if you don't, hey, AM4 still is a good option. We can still, you know, get more work out of it. That's a really wise move. So ecosystem is very stable. So at this point in time, if you are like, hey, do I have to go into AM5? Not necessarily. Especially if you're all looking for, hey, 1 to 2 years, I want good computation. AM4 is still mind-blowing. And again, I'm literally running this YouTube channel on AMD Bulldozer. So let that sink in. I'm very lucky that I did not buy a Bulldog. Bulldog was really, really bad. Bulldozer was bad. So let's see. So I can talk from experience that you can use old computer to get your job done if you have to. It's like 16 GB DDR3. Now I'm really curious. I actually want to jump from DDR3 to DDR5 directly. I want to bypass DDR4. Let's see what happens. So what about the competition? Well, competition, they have to exceed around 25% uplift each generation. That is very difficult. Intel has like not done that in a long time. So that's going to be very, very hard from Intel's point of view. Now basically AMD will keep their AM4 socket around for low cost operation. That also creates a big issue for Intel where they cannot just reduce their price, because if they reduce their price too much, again, they will not make any profit. So what's the point of doing it? And if they are keeping the price high, and let's say even they are like, you know, only close to, you know, AM5 system, they're like, dude, I can just buy AM4 for half the cost and just be happy with it. So that creates a price creep issue for Intel. Intel have to be really precisely priced where they're like, dude, we are making some profit out of it, and we are like, you know, not getting destroyed by AM4 high-end processors or AM5 basic processor. So it's going to be tough for Intel. And again, this is the slides from literally Intel itself, where it's like, we remain confident we will regain process leadership. Even Intel knows at this point in time. So Raptor Lake has to be either very good or it has to be very cheap in order to survive properly. Because I did say, saying that I have more performance, yes, Ferrari has far more performance than a Toyota, but people buy Toyota, not Ferrari. Ferrari went bankrupt, Toyota did not. Why? Because people are like, dude, price to performance ratio. It's like, yeah, it's like, it's much faster. It's like, dude, where are the roads, my man? So you have to understand the price has to be balanced properly. And again, at this point in time, Raptor Lake at best case scenario should be good. If we are really lucky, then it would be have that, like, 25% uplift, or maybe even 30%. At that point in time, it will be very amazing. But realistically, we have to wait till 14th gen to surpass AMD. Intel is also taking some new initiative. Again, they are also changing their paradigm. Like Big Little Core was their first paradigm, and they are working on something big, and that's why they also jumped into GPU market. So there are some hope that Intel could become the next big thing. And we want that. We want the competition. The better the competition, the more horsepower we're gonna get for less price that we're gonna get it. So it's a really desirable thing to have. And I really hope Intel actually pulls out, pulls out a win, so that AMD is like, no, we actually have to keep the price, competitive. Otherwise, we'll just go. Competition is good for you and me. That's why I always wish for it. Don't wish, oh, AMD should crush Intel. No, that will be bad for us. Don't even wish Intel crushes AMD. That would be bad for us. But it's like both should compete with each other. It will be good for us. So this was my presentation on the latest release of AMD 7000 Ryzen series. Hopefully you have liked it, learned from it. In that case, please click the like button, share it amongst your friends. That will help me a lot. If you didn't like it, didn't enjoy it, I urge you to press dislike, press it twice to show me extra disappointment. Please leave a comment because I do try to reply to all of them. Subscribe, press the bell icon if you're free, and as always, thanks for watching.